Good afternoon, good evening, happy solstice, thanks for making it out. Yeah, I think it's no mistake that we're here on the day that receives the most light to illuminate probably one of the most controversial topics within the field of psychedelic care. It seems to be the one that people have a lot of strong opinions about, want to create the most rules about, and it really can stir up a lot because if you've been in a psychedelic space, psychedelic container, whether that's recreational or therapeutic, you've likely encountered something related to touch with whom you're with, boundaries, like, you know, maybe even violations, right? And this is a thing that occurs, and that's part of the reason that we're having this conversation and discussing this topic, is to really start to bring these questions and these scenarios out into the open, right? So they don't just survive in the darkness. They're not these shadowy things, but we're actually speaking to what are the practices. And what the best practices are for me might not be the best practices for you. Every practitioner is going to have their own unique background that they are coming from, their own unique training, their own unique codes of ethics that they're operating under. And so what I'm going to share this evening is just really coming from that place of, I don't believe there's one right answer. There are some very clear-cut things that we should definitely not be doing. Assault is not one of those things that should be happening in the psychedelic space. Lack of consent is something that should not be happening in the psychedelic space. But as Shannon mentioned, there's a lot of vast things. And so I just want to name that I'm not going to be privileging any particular organizational perspective. I'm not going to be privileging any perspective that belongs to a singular profession. That what I most desire to do is engage you all in a conversation this evening and just share some considerations and thoughts so that we can really start to understand some of the complexity and the nuance that comes along with this topic. And even with a theoretical understanding, like, right, that there is an in-the-moment way of responding that you can just, like, some of that training or some of those ideas go out the window because that's not actually what's happening in the space. And so it's really important from my perspective that we're not just following ethics from a perspective of guidelines, but that we are actually embodying our own ethos. We're embodying how and why we're making those choices, and that that's really clear. Part of the perspective that I'm going to be speaking from this evening is also informed by being on a lot of different, in a lot of different spaces. So I've been in the clinical world. Ketamine, I'm familiar with that. I've been in the underground world. I've seen groups, I've seen individuals, international, ceremonial. So there are a lot of different ways and contexts, and that's partially what I'm going to be speaking to today. Most of my background and training from the very beginning comes from a body-based perspective. And so just to acknowledge, like, this is what I live and breathe, and this is the way that I operate in the world. So if I'm sharing some things that you're like, whoa, I don't really know if that lands for me, just know that, like, that's okay. We're not necessarily all here to agree on the exact same things, but we're just here to have conversations and to learn from each other so that together as a community that hopefully we can do it better and or send people someone else's way of, like, hey, I'm not the right person, but I know someone who has the exact skill set that I think that you need. I do hope to make this a little bit of a conversation and weave in some Q&A throughout it, so I may take a pause and just ask the group of questions. So if I do that, just throw your hand up or just, speak out. I really want this to start to feel like an engagement rather than me talking at you. If there are specific questions about concepts that I am sharing with you today that you don't quite get, I would say maybe hold those to the end, and I'm available for conversation afterwards as well. You're always free to come up and talk to me directly. So, yeah, again, thanks for having me. Back to Boulder. Reilly's going to come join us for the conversation in a little while, but I just want to acknowledge you in the space for a moment and just say Reilly's been such a great creative partner and collaborator and idea bouncer offer in this process. So I just want to acknowledge and say thanks for that. So, touch, the use of touch in psychedelic care. I don't really believe that we can talk about touch in psychedelics without also talking about love and power and how all of those things interface together to create a certain energetic that is perhaps very uniquely in some ways held within a psychedelic space. These are feelings that get amplified between us, and they're very powerful. There's a quote that I found from Ram Dass that I really loved today that I'll read here. Love is the most transformative medicine, for love slowly transforms you into what psychedelics only get you to glimpse. So just take that in for a moment. There's something that psychedelics allow us to have a glimpse of, a taste into. And arguably, that's love. And that's probably a huge reason for doing psychedelics to begin with, in whatever the context is, right? I want to have fun. I want to spread more love. I want to be well. I want to have healing so I can experience more love in myself. So I don't believe that we can really talk about touch without also talking about love and what we do with that and our relationship to power. Psychedelic care. What is even meant by that? What does that look like? Psychedelics, I mean, some people say it's mind manifesting. Partially, that's true. But psyche originally means soul. It was a term that was co-opted by the psychology industry. Entheogen is another term, accessing the God within. Care being a concern for one's well-being. So the definition that I came up with for psychedelic care is to be good stewards towards the well-being of one's soul. Sounds pretty deep, yeah? Yeah. Being the good stewards towards the well-being of one's soul. So if that's what we're really doing in psychedelic care, how do we actually properly develop the skill set for soul tending? Pretty good job. And where does the role of touch fit into that? And what do we even mean when we say touch? Like, is it the physical body? Like, I'm curious, is when you think of touch, like, who thinks we're talking physical? Yeah. I would say that's partially right. And there's so much more, and I want to speak to that for a moment. Because there is physical touch, but there are all these layers, and pretty much every wisdom tradition points to this, right? That we have our physical body, and then we have these other layers to our body. And really, when we're talking about psychedelics, we're talking about opening up boundaries. We're talking about making novel connections in the brain that allow us to experience things beyond ordinary reality, including the typical way that we relate to our body. And so that changes. The body morphs, changes, shifts, like energy, right? People can experience and feel energy in a different way, heightened emotion, different ways of conceptualizing and thinking about things, receiving insight, contact with spirit. And so it's really all 5 of these layers that we're touching when we are in relationship with someone in a psychedelic space. It's the physical, It's the energetic, it's the emotional, it's the mental, and it's the spiritual. The good news is this gives us a more complete way of seeing one another. And once we start to see one another in this way, we can't unsee it. And we become more human. And I feel like that's a beautiful thing. So why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant because before we ever make the decision about making physical contact with someone, there are all of these other layers and dimensions to consider. Emotional touch is a thing, and it shows up in the space, and this is a lot of what kind of creates these certain feelings well before someone maybe ever touches another person. And it's really common, right, in these spaces to really project whatever those feelings are inside of oneself onto the other. Because sometimes we're accessing something so unfamiliar, like, oh my God, I've never experienced this before. This can't be me, it's you. You're the one that's making me feel this way. And so just to acknowledge and name that that is a dynamic that can happen in the space. And so when we're holding boundaries and when we're holding space, it's really for a lot bigger process, and the physical contact is one small component that we need to consider. So, if we do this for love, and love is the answer, then how do we own the divinity inherent in that and also own our humanity, which means that we're flawed and we make mistakes. And this is vulnerable territory, and we'll probably fuck up sometimes. And that's okay, and we're all human. And we're here to have these conversations and learn from one another. And I would venture to guess, right, that these feelings of love that get stirred up, the emotional terrain, the spiritual terrain, the projection, the transference, it probably happens so much more than what we're actually talking about. Like, I'm going to ask a vulnerable question here, and you can choose to raise your hand or not, but I'm going to raise my hand, so maybe you'll play along with me. How many of you have ever had a crush on a therapist, or a mentor, or a massage teacher? Yeah, probably a lot of us have had that, like even in our adult life, right? It shows up. And maybe that's become explicit, like maybe that's something that you've shared with them, and maybe it's not. And maybe it's something that in the role of client, possibly in the role of practitioner, that you've even acted on at some point. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand about that one, because it's really vulnerable territory. But you just want to acknowledge that this is the reality of the space that we're dealing with, and this is part of owning our humanity. And these are natural feelings. You know, the English language is kind of not so great. We really talk about love as if it's one thing, and it's not. In the Greek language, they have 9 different identifiable expressions of love. So it's very clear when you're talking about eros or philos or agape and what those things mean. And we just don't distinguish things to that degree here. And so it becomes really confusing when we don't have a full context and the language to share with one another for what it is that we're even talking about. But I'm guessing that crush that you had on your massage teacher, it wasn't just about physical attraction. It wasn't just because they touched you some way one day that had that thought come in or had that idea. It was the totality of their presence. It was the totality of who they were and how they walked through the world, and maybe that little thing they said to you, and right? But a way that they made you feel. And so I just pose this question because I don't want to make touch the enemy. I point towards touch as if it's the thing that's causing these feelings and it needs to be stamped out at all costs. Because I personally don't believe that that's the accurate way to go. So, how do we let ourselves fall in love with life? Fall in love with each other while attending to the vulnerabilities and the nuances with care? And if we're practitioner, how do we hold that with sacred nature and not abuse that and weaponize that against the other? Because that's no longer love and that's no longer care. So we do have responsibilities to attend to with this, acknowledging all of these components. And there's actually a lot here to consider. Even if we just look purely at physical touch, there are a number of dimensions. And I won't be able to go into all the detail around these today, but just want to acknowledge that there's a complex web here to track, physically and energetically. So I'm going to just name a few of these and kind of rattle off these 8 core considerations, and I'll have an opportunity to dive into some of them a little more. So number 1 is the context. For both you and the client, all 8 of these considerations. What is the context? And so that includes the history. What is someone's trauma background? What are they bringing into the space? What are their intentions? What's the setup? What are the skills and awareness? So what's the level of competency? What is the level of competency you have as a practitioner? What's your training and background? What's your awareness? And what's the skills and awareness that the client's bringing into the space? These things are going to matter. Communication and consent. Is there clear communication happening and clear consent happening up front in advance? Preferably, communications are written and not only verbal, so people really have time to take in what it is that's being said and can assimilate. And if there are questions that arise, that there's some space for that. What is what I'm going to call relational geometry between the two individuals? And so how have I already established spatial dynamics with you, facing? How have we resided in this space? Have we only been talking? Have we practiced touch? Have we done other kinds of experiments that are body-based that would lend themselves to moving in that direction? Boundary styles. If someone has a boundary style that's already highly merged, that's probably going to be something to really pay attention to with regards to being in psychedelic space and merging.
Can you explain what you mean by merging?
Sure. So there are 3 kind of primary boundary styles that I like to think of. If you think of 2 overlapping circles, kind of like a Venn diagram, that would be merging. Like, I'm in your space, and I kind of need, right? So that's one boundary style. The other I would call more rigid. So if you think kind of like, nope, steel wall, nobody's getting in. Different boundary style. And then there's like the permeable, semi-permeable. Like, oh, I can just make contact and really make the decision clearly about what I do and don't let inside of my field. And so there's the physical boundary, the obvious skin encapsulated ego. And then there's the energetic boundary. What we refer to also is the kinesphere in body psychotherapy. It's usually how much you can kind of reach your arm around in space. Culturally, this might be a little different, but we like our space in America, and I'm no different. Types of touch. So we talk about touch again like it's kind of one thing or it has one intention, and it really doesn't. And my paperwork that I have for clients, it really differentiates 4 specific types of touch: awareness, teaching, working, nurturing. And I don't have a lot of time to dive into the details of all of those, but just to say, there's different types of touch that are used for different purposes at different times. And then there's the quality of touch, the way that we are touching someone, the depth that we're touching someone. So there's a lot of different considerations, and so like touch is its own legit profession. And body workers have deep knowledge of specific things that, you know, psychologists and medical professionals do not. And so just to really amplify that this is a body of wisdom to be respected equally. The 7th and 8th considerations are like, what's the current state of being, right? So we could arrive in the space for a session and everything's going swell, and then all of a sudden something shifts. Maybe it shifts inside of you and you recognize, oh my gosh, I am actually not in a grounded, regulated place right now. Yeah, not a good time to touch your client. And then, after all of those considerations, then we can start to add in the question around substance. But it's last on the list, not the first on the list. And so there's going to be variation. There's going to be variations between the substance that is being ingested, the effects, the dosing, right? So they're all going to present a different energetic signature to them and a different experience for the client. A dissociative like ketamine is going to be quite different than the amphetamine nature of MDMA that's very embodied, right? And so that's a consideration as well in terms of like, yeah, you don't need to like, apply the same mindset and tool set to every situation. So, self-honesty with the use of touch is essential. What might that look like? So, practitioner competency is number 1, right? Because you're going to be primarily responsible for yourself and you're primarily responsible for the space. And so you're the one who's going to be leading and modeling if you are indeed the one that's holding the space. Some of the questions that are useful to ask oneself is, well, what is my existing training and scope of practice specific to the use of touch? Part of the reason this is important is what I want to point out is that some of the, if not all of the ones that I've heard of personally, sexual assaults that are happening even within clinical trials and psychedelic spaces are by people who have no real touch training. They're PhDs, they have psychology degrees, they haven't been properly trained in touch. So, right scope of practice really matters, and I think it's just important to highlight that because there's just as much that the psyche people, that the mind people can learn from the body people as the body people can learn from the psyche people. And I think that's part of the conversation that we need to start having and bringing out into the open, because the mind has really been privileged for way too long. How comfortable am I providing touch? And in what context? What's my personal touch history? Some of us have histories with touch that might be related to trauma. They might activate something. And so that's an important recognition. Like, even if you've done your own work and you're holding space for another, there's something that can happen that can activate that trauma history inside of you. And so now you're holding space for yourself and you're holding space for your client, right? And just understanding all of that and where you stand and really being honest in what you can provide. And then another consideration to this is how comfortable might you be with other, just bodily expression in general. So this could be things like big emotional outbursts in any direction, creative, destructive, anger, erotic, all the things. And holding space for that, right? This idea of like not only physical touch, but if there's something that's big happening in the body, in this space, like what do? Do we freeze? Do we know how to actually meet and work with that energy and hold space for that? Because sometimes that's the better alternative than actually like physically touching someone. And there's a question that's built in that too, in terms of, like, well, what's the impulse to touch to begin with? Is it for me, or is it for you? And how so? Like, do I want to calm you down so you're not crying or you're not like freaking out? Like, maybe that might be a legitimate response. But in general, I'm for the argument that psychedelic care really requires a knowledge base of working with the body. We've seen a lot of clinical trials with people, lying on beds and with the eye mask, right? And there's a particular format and way that that's happening. For a reason, right? Because it's a trial, and they need to do it all the same way, and they can't really have a lot of client interference. However, I bet once this starts to open up, right, and once we start to have more legal avenues, there's going to be professionals with all sorts of different backgrounds and all sorts of different training that are coming in, and I don't think it's going to look that way where everybody's lying on a couch with an eye mask for their psychedelic session. So essentially, part of how I see the role of a practitioner is we are there to be a sustaining force in the space with someone. There's all this possibility of energy that could happen in any direction, a more destructive direction, let's just call it, a little bit more of a creative, happy-go-lucky energy. And really, if we're there meeting the client where they are, we're there as a sustaining force. And that requires a lot of good decision-making skills. So what could this potentially look like in practice? And I'll give a couple of more extreme examples here of where someone might really need to make the decision and the choice to use their body and to use touch in the space. Well, one could be like, wow, if someone is really having a bad time and they are thrashing about and like having the potential to hurt themselves, and there are objects around the space, and there is like, there's no talking to this energy, right? This might be a place where someone really needs to show up fully, and I mean fully. This is not a place to just sit down. This is a place to be grounded in your full power and presence and be able to meet and hold that energy with your full body and your being. It's not a pretty little pat on the arm. And these are the kinds of things that actually happen in real life, in real psychedelic spaces, that unfortunately we're not seeing because of the clinical model being the only one that's shown right now. This is a very real thing that can happen, and that someone could be
needs to be prepared for. And so how do we contain and support that without just going into restraint and resistance, which is, if you have seen some of the videos that have been put out, like there was some kind of like a little bit disturbing things that looked a bit like restraint. So that's one direction that could move. When we think about the other end of the spectrum, creation, creative, woohoo, sounds fun, great, right? Yeah. Well, this is also where, like, there's a lot of life force moving through, and probably a way that feels really good for people. And this might be where you start to see more erotic feelings come online, more sexual feelings come online. And those sexual feelings might get directed to you. And so how do you intelligently and usefully actually meet and use that energy, not to shut the person down, but to actually let that movement happen, let the life force move through them in a way that's honoring of their humanness, that's honoring of the creative being that they are. This could look something like more like you utilizing expressive arts. Maybe there's some dancing that happens here. Like maybe that's where you have your rattle, right, or your drum, or whatever it is, and you engage the energy and you let that person move with it. And like, right, there might be some nearby contact. You might start to do something together where you're interactive, and it can become a really playful thing when we aren't scared of the energy. And we actually know how to meet it, and we can welcome it in the space in a good way. I just want to ask, has anybody ever had a whole lot of fun in a psychedelic session? Yeah, can we talk about the fun parts too? There's so much emphasis on trauma and healing and like go in and do the hard thing. That's not necessarily what we all need to heal and to become better human beings. It's a model that's built around dysfunction and labels. And so I just put this in the space to offer an alternative. So in terms of practicalities, because I've been talking a lot about theory here and giving some examples, just to touch into the substance, the dosing, the power dynamic, what might happen in those certain situations. So let's just imagine someone has a ketamine session. They probably actually might not be up around dancing so much. They might really be lying down, you know, and that creates an inherent power differential. Like, think about the relational geometry of that for a moment. You have a client in your space, lying down, you're with them, they're not even in their body. For the most part, right? Like, that's really a different consideration potentially of like how you might engage and touch that person. In contrast, if someone is a little more amplified and they're seated up and they're with you and they're looking at you and you're interacting and there's some lucidity online, different choices are going to be potentially made there. And one of the biggest considerations too is like, you've had the conversation, let's say, with the person in advance around consent and touch and contact, and you've checked all of those boxes. Well, in the moment, does that person still have access to consent, to real clear consent to provide you if you offer them touch? If they don't have verbal access, Have you already worked out some other way for them to give affirmation to you? Is there a head nod? Is there a, right? Like, what are the things that you've already worked out with this person to know if they're not fully with you? Because just because they're not saying anything, A, it doesn't mean nothing's happening under the radar there. And B, it doesn't mean that they don't need you. It doesn't mean that they couldn't benefit from a little bit of contact and ground. And so just speaking of that contact, like how we enter someone's space, how we ask for that permission. These are all factors as well in terms of creating a safe container, creating less of a power differential where people really actually do feel like they have a voice and a choice to say no. And there are more and less appropriate places to make contact with folks. So I would love to just kind of throw it out here to you all in terms of, you know, let's say that you were in a session with someone and you were asking to make contact. Like, what would feel like some of the safer places on the physical body to potentially start? Hands. Mm-hmm.
Maybe shoulders and thumbs.
Shoulders. Yeah. Okay. So more distal arms. Anything else?
Maybe
Feet. Yeah. I saw somebody say head. Uh-huh. Do you see that these are more distal points on the body? The hands, the feet, the top of the head can be a little sensitive for some people. That's also kind of a cultural thing sometimes. But right, like starting distally on the body where we don't have a lot of the nerve plexus going on in the center of our being. Like, if you don't have a lot of touch training, but you really feel confident in your presence and your contact, like these could be some really safe places to start to send someone the message, like, I'm here with you, I've got you, that are not so vulnerable. When we start talking about moving into the center of the body and the center of the being, so we have nerve plexus, we have all of the chakras, if you believe in that sort of energetic system and energetic anatomy. And so when we're touching someone at their core, literally, it's sending a very different message, and we're in a super different relationship at that point. And I would say that this would be a place where it would be advisable to get some training around probably before you really go for touching someone on their abdomen, let's just say. And that's not to make touching someone on their abdomen wrong, not in the least. But it's just having the right context and having the right skill set and understanding for why. What am I actually doing here? And how does it benefit the person that I'm with? I want to go ahead and invite Reilly to come up. And Reilly he's our griot. This is the word you shared with me the other day. He's our story keeper, our myth holder. And so he has examples of like what's happening in the space. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm a reporter. I've written about drugs for a long time. Washington Post, Double Blind, Chacroon, Elusive News, and Rooster Magazine was my home for a long time. And I've written about opioids, psychedelics, cannabis, all kinds of different things. There are a lot of reporters on drugs. I'm one of the few reporters on drugs. And I've been trying to do this article for like a long time that I'm calling Psychotherapists Want to Own Psychedelic Therapy and Body Workers Want In. But I haven't been able to finish it because it's like such a tough time to be talking about touch and psychedelics. Because we had this podcast that came out a while back where it's all this like abuse of psychedelic therapists touching people in inappropriate ways. And so I just haven't figured out how to write the article. But as I talk to people that do psychedelics, that are sitters and guides and facilitators, they just talk over and over again about the importance of touch to people. And these are the people that we want, I think we should be listening to. Because the underground world is this big, and the clinical trial world is this big, and there are all these clinical trials that are all about just the brain, the brain, the brain, the brain. Psychedelics are a thing that goes into your brain is broken, and psychedelics makes them better if you lay quietly on the mat for 4 hours. And there's just this whole other giant world of massage therapists and yogi people and reikists, and when I travel in the psychedelic underground, people are just as likely to be doing those kinds of things as to be doing talky-talk therapy. And people have been telling me that it's important because it's important to them. And to humanize it, I met a woman named Bets. And she lives not too far from here, and she told me that her problem is in her body. Her problem is not in her mind. Her problem was when she was 18 months old, she had hip dysplasia, where her femurs were not in their sockets. And what they did was they tied her down, and they pulled her leg bones out and then shoved them back into her socket with no anesthesia, because it's hard to give anesthesia to little babies. And so, without really knowing why, she spent a lot of her life being just anxious and feeling unsafe and feeling like she couldn't trust people because her dad was standing over her while she was having this terrible procedure done to her. And she couldn't work it out with talk. And so she found an MDMA therapist. And the MDMA therapist helped her to go into her body, there's this theory that we store our trauma in our body, that we release it by moving our body. And she said it after 10 sessions of MDMA therapy, it really helped her to be less anxious than she was before, to feel more safe in her own body, and to feel like she can hold herself in a way that she wasn't held by her parents when she needed it, when she was a child. And I find that story extremely compelling. And now Bets is a psychedelic psychotherapist, but she's not a psychotherapist, she's just a massage therapist. So she wants to go to the MAPS trial. The Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies has this trial for post-traumatic stress disorder. But if you're a massage therapist, at the moment you can't get in. It's psychotherapists, it's things like that. And she just feels very, that's unjust. And a lot of people that I've talked to feel like that's unjust. They feel like body workers, she told me, body workers, we want to be part of the clinics, and the clinics want us to be part of the clinics, but right now we can't be. And right now we're discriminated against because people think the body is like low. You know, we come from this Christian background that says the body is this dirty thing and you have to like rise above. This is what she says. And so I just interviewed 3 or 4 psychedelic workers and asked them about what do they actually do. And touch is a big part of it. Does light touch, where she just puts her hands on people and she just tries to move energy through the person's body. I am not sure what that means, but I think she does. And I talked to one of her clients that said that it really helped her get over an addiction. Most of this seems like it's happening at lower doses. Like, it seems like people don't want people to be totally in another dimension because they want them to be present and able to respond. And it's happening with a lot of work on both sides, where it's like they'll do a lot of massages before taking the psychedelic, and then they'll do a session with the psychedelic, and then they'll do more sessions afterwards. It's just like, what is that tension telling you? What is that tension in your back telling you? What is that tension in your face telling you? And so I'm going to find a way to write this article, in part because it's very personal to me. I've been writing a long time about psychedelics as a way to cure mental health problems. And I've interviewed therapist after therapist after therapist. And finally, this one I really connected with, I said, can I try it? And when I went to do it with her, I thought it was going to be all about talk. And she said, we can talk if you want to, but that's not what this is about. And she's a therapist, like that's what she does in normal life. But she says, what the psychedelics are about is about the body. You've come this far with the mind, she said. You still have these problems that you can't get over. Let's see what happens when we focus on the body. And so there was me feeling my body, and then there was her pushing on my body in ways that felt different and felt more impactful and felt more interesting. Pushing really hard sometimes in a way that I might not have felt comfortable with. If I hadn't had the loving embrace of the medicine around me to make me feel safe and to feel like I could go deeper into my body. And so I've done psychedelics a lot of different ways, but two of the ways have been with people that work with the body. And I just find it the most interesting, beautiful, transformative thing. I think after my first session of really doing body work on the psychedelic, I think I've never quite been as anxious as I was before that. And so that is what's happening in the world, and I like she said, I'm a keeper of stories, and it's important to me what people are actually doing. And what people are actually doing is they're touching each other. And so I would love to hear from y'all about what's on y'all's mind in terms of touching, in terms of do you think people should touch? Do you feel like it's too much of a minefield? Just what's going on with y'all? I think we'd just love to hear it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a big topic, and I love that there's a mix of people in the space, which is fantastic. We get to have different perspectives. So yeah, what are you all feeling? What's on your mind? What are you thinking? What's on your hearts?
Can I start with a poll maybe? So, who thinks psychedelics should just be used with talky talk, with no touching? Who thinks you should never be able to touch other than maybe like a handhold or maybe like a hand on the shoulder? Versus who thinks that you should be able to maybe like do massage or craniosacral or like raw finger or something like that while you're on psychedelics? Okay, that seems strong. Anybody care to elaborate? Why?
I guess I feel called to share that I work with people recovering from long-term abuse. Often people who grew up in traumatic households. And for a lot of people who are coming to me, a trauma recovery coach, for this, it's because they have explored every therapy that they can get to, and nothing has helped. In the way that you were talking about about vets, that it was something that needed to be corrected in a different space, right? And what I wanted to share was just about how I think it's our responsibility as practitioners when someone comes to us with that sort of trauma history to be a corrective experience for them in physical touch. For a lot of people, touch is they only experience touch when they come to us as an activated thing, as protecting myself or like sexually intimate, and they don't have that in between. And I used to not have that in between. And psychedelics helped me get it in between, helped me understand how to downregulate, how to, and like sort of like you were saying, it's not just physical, it's on all of these different levels, right? There's a whole range of intimacy that people learn to experience in psychedelic states with a person who has built already a really strong foundation in their relationship with you. I just wanted to name that and call that, this is what we're doing. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the term intimacy, right? Like another one of these terms that, like, ooh, what does that spawn? When we actually talk about the truth of what it is, and it's like, it's building safety, it's building intimacy.
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear your perspectives on gender identity and sexual identity and being for the therapist and the patient or client. Because I could imagine like your experience might be different if you're a cisgendered white man and your therapist is gay and he's man versus if you're with a heterosexual female pressing on your back. So I just kind of wanted to hear how, and also we live in a patriarchal society, so like as a female therapist it's really different than a female client with a male therapist.
Yeah, so I think that there are, like, dudes are the ones that do the bad stuff. Like, all the stories that you hear are dudes. The male therapists, I mean, not all, sorry, I shouldn't say all, but, and so I don't know if you could, like, write a law that said females can touch people, but males can't. Would I be okay with that? What do you think, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I feel like this is true, in some ways I feel like it's a construct. Like, if I am not looking at the individual and what I'm saying that, and I'm labeling that gender identity and I'm experiencing the energetics of that person, to me, that's the thing that's really showing up in the space and that's really influencing the space. I've been around some really solid men that really, like, I'm like, wow, you're finally somebody that can hold space for my big energy. Thank goodness.
The spiciest thing I know about in this space is a therapist who's a man who works with women that have been sexually abused in some way. And the way that he gets them to work through their trauma is that they take MDMA together and they get naked together to show her that it's okay to be next to each other with a man, and you can be safe. And that is just super out there and just wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's overt, right? I would call that very overt gesture. And then there's all of the covert stuff that happens, right? So, like, I don't care what gender you are, like, let's make no mistake about it. Like, all of us have some little seductress, flirtatious nature inside of us that can get activated. Right? And so there may be a way that women could actually activate that more covert energy, right? But like, it's passive, and I didn't do anything, right? It's safe. And so there's some nuance to it.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, of course.
I think that I think this is part of the reason why it's important that there is a large diversity of people who are offering this, right? Like, we need it to be accessible, becoming a practitioner needs to be accessible to as many kinds of people as possible, so that someone who has a trauma history, they know they cannot come into a relationship with someone, like, therapeutically, where that is not going to be an issue for them. Like, for example, what you were saying about, like, a heterosexual man, like, you know, we know what we're talking about. Sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, yeah, if I don't feel comfortable with a gay man massaging me, then that's not for me. If I don't feel right.
You should be able to find somebody that you are comfortable with, and even once you have found someone, like, when you are looking for people, like, the person that we as practitioners should be understanding our client's trauma history and how they are going to be impacted by us, and that should color whether we are going to interact with them or how we're going to interact with them physically, if at all. That was what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I'm a therapist and I work in the ketamine space, and I always name it. Like, if I'm working with a female, then let's talk about this dynamic here. And hey, you're going to be under by the way, we have cameras in the room. Everything is recorded for safety, and that's for the safety of both of us. It may feel a little weird. Nobody's going to look at it. It's just stored. So we have that safety protocol in place, but it's always something that I identify. It's always something we talk about, touch, the consent. We always talk about, hey, if I get up and move in the room, I'm going to let you know that I'm moving closer, or this is what's going on in your space. So we're always defaulting to the client's safety, and if you don't want to work with me, that's okay, and I understand that. And there's plenty of people, right? But also very aware in the space as a male is that all it takes is a point of a finger, and that's the end for me, right? And so, as a male therapist, I carry that fear somewhat, and that very stark awareness in the work that we do. So I'm very selective on who I will work with because of that, and that's unfortunate, right? But that's just the way things are right now. And so I just wanted to name that as well. That's just how we look right now.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to?
Tying into the last thing you said, you have to have some discretion about choosing patients. Ultimately, we want to be able to offer help and care to as many people as possible. But what are some of the various ways that we can essentially sift through and decipher what care is right for each individual, especially if we're talking about psychoactive modalities or various forms of physical touch? What sort of metrics, or what is there something that is concrete, essentially, that can be referenced to that can give you confidence about whether or not to make that decision?
Sure, I think there's the medical aspect and the medical screening side of things, but there's also doing your own work. And I think this is such a big part of having to sit with different medicines and good experiences and challenging experiences, so that you can know then when somebody walks in and you receive somebody, you can think about, you can conceptualize, well, what medicine, how may they react in medicine, what is their history, and what's happening in the here and now, right? Let's not rush into this. Instead of a 1-hour prep session, maybe we need to meet 5 or 6 times in person so that we can see what's growing between us, so that I can see, can I be in a room alone with you, or do I need to invite a female co-therapist into the space? And then the complexity of that is, how do we do that and keep it all financially accessible for everybody? Because you just double the price, right? So there's just so many variables in play there.
Yeah, and what you're naming is actually, I want to name kind of one of my biases and perspectives is like, I feel like the accessibility question and this sort of hierarchy and power question, we can solve some of this by empowering everyone to have this knowledge and conversation. When we empower everyone to hold this knowledge, when we re-empower our communities, our families, our loved ones to know how to show up and support people in the space, then we start to have some different conversations around access and power. And so I just want to presence that in the space because it's actually something that I feel quite strongly about.
Just one last comment or question? Did you have your hand up as well?
I did. It felt a little tangential, but I didn't say it for just one.
Just final, yeah, sure.
More just an observation is that some of the most powerful experiences I've had both on and off of psychedelics have been when I've been free to name the desire for touch and then exploring it with the sitter therapist, but not actually acting on it and watching it evolve. And then shifting in and out of touch more on like the subtle energetic level, where the act of physical touch feels more like almost like a shutting down release. It's like a habitual way of acting for me to shut down the vulnerability of the spaciousness. And if I can just observe it and watch the projection shift through my mind, then the space can open up to just more like a loving presence, and then the touching can happen just much more energetically. So.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. I mean, there really is so much that can happen in that space. You were mentioning this earlier, Reilly, about the heart in its electromagnetic their electromagnetic field that like reaches out at least 10 feet. And this is the same thing that like the Earth is emitting. It has this electromagnetic core, and so it's like our heartbeat actually syncs up with the beat of the Earth, which I find really cool. But right, like we can feel that, and especially if it's opened up in the psychedelic realm, like we could really feel that. And it's like, yeah, if you've never experienced it before, like, whoa, this is a new thing. Like, it's a skill set for the participant to also learn how to engage with or be with. So we've been speaking a lot kind of from the practitioner side today. There's also so much of an equal level of skill set that really, if someone is a client, that they can develop over time to optimize these experiences and receive the most benefit. Last one?
Yeah, I just want to like say just what that last one really like tied in for me is that like to me like a deeper conversation beneath this one is like the relationality that like in the psychedelic space it's just as in everything it's a relationship, and so not getting like lost in is touch yes or is touch no, but like what's alive in the relationship, and not being in this I am an isolated thing where I'm somehow separate from the practitioner, I'm somehow separate from like the person I'm serving. Either way, like so recognizing that there is a relationship alive and like how to tend to that relationship.
Yeah, it's a living, breathing, dynamic thing. Thank goodness.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole and Reilly, for driving from Denver to